I would try without, but, you know.
Oh, here we go. Good. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guest officials from Poland and Ukraine, dear friends, it is a great honor to be the moderator of this opening panel. The Russian aggression against Ukraine is the most important conflict in Europe since 1945. Because just like the Second World War, it is not only the Russian conduct, but the Russian motivation for this war that is just as obscene as the worst elements of the 1940s. Nobody from Poland or Ukraine needs to be reminded of that, but as an American, I do sometimes need to remind our friends across the Atlantic of this and how important this is. And Ukraine is fighting for, not just for itself, and for its right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which is Ukraine's right. Russia has no right to take it from them or take it from anybody else. Ukraine is also fighting for all of us, because just like in the 1940s, the outcome of this war will be of key importance to the future security of this continent. And there are some who understood this from day one, and that is Poland. From day one, Poland showed great, strong leadership in supporting Ukraine. While others dithered, Poland was pivotal and strong. And for that, Poland deserves the utmost respect and gratitude. So, we're going to talk about small victories and big victories and the challenges that remain. And at this time, I would like to welcome our panelists. I do have to pick this up here so I get everything right. We have, let's see here, Anastasia Bondar, the Deputy Minister of Culture and Information, joining us from Ukraine. We have Mr. Marcin Chruściel, who is representing Mrs. Jadwiga Emilewicz, the Special Plenipotentiary of the Polish government for the reconstruction of Ukraine. We have Mrs. Shams Asadi, head of the Human Rights Office in Vienna. We have Mr. Michael Capponi, the CEO of Global Empowerment Mission. And last but not least, Mr. John Hewko, General Secretary and CEO of Rotary International. Do we have the minister with us? Oh, yes. Thank you. Let's get to it. Madam Minister, let me start with you. I hope you can hear us. I unfortunately cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Do the testing.
Yes, we can. So, Madam Deputy Minister, let me start with you. Small victories, big victories, remaining challenges in Ukraine right now. The floor is yours. Please give us an overview of where you think, how we got here, and what remains to be, what is the most pressing items on the agenda, please.
I'm very glad to see everyone here, and hope you're going to have very fruitful discussion at this meeting. So what I would like to start with is that it's 580 days, 5,000 missiles, not to mention thousands of airstrikes and drones. Seems like there are no hesitations left on what is going on. Massive destruction of over 20% of territory, airstrikes and drone attacks over civil and energy infrastructure, direct shelling and illicit trafficking of cultural values. And all of a sudden, I come to UNESCO World Heritage Summit and face some kind of a different universe. It turns out that for some member states, everything is still not so clear and definite, and Ukrainian war is called a delicate matter. We have reached some results. We have put an unprecedented amount of 20 cultural sites on the list under the enhanced protection. Unprecedented because before Ukraine, there were only 18 sites in total on this list during last 23 years. It was also initiated to include Kiev and Lviv UNESCO sites into the list under danger. But it is not an achievement to be celebrated. Under normal circumstances, the countries would do everything not to get their sites into the list under danger. According to the existing international wordings, the sole responsibility of the country owner to take care of its heritage. But the situation in Ukraine, provoked by Russia's war of aggression against our country and by the Russians bombing the World Heritage Sites, clearly shows that the international operational guidelines are no more relevant. So my philosophical question for today would be is how much more time and how many more missiles should reach our territory for the world to stop living according to the old rules and name the things in their own names. To make my point right here, it's not sole Ukrainians' responsibility in the unprovoked war of Russia against Ukraine to defend the world heritage. And again, to be clear, it's not only about the movable cultural sites or infrastructure. It's about democracy and truth in the whole world. And for the final statement, we are not victims. We are fighters, protecting the human values of the world. And everything we need is for the world not to get tired of watching us, but to stand for our side in all possible ways. Thank you.
That deserves applause. Let me just follow up then very quickly, Madam Minister. So in terms of the cultural heritage sites in Ukraine, how many would you say currently have been destroyed or are targeted? And what would you concretely, specifically, would like to see the global community to do about that?
Right now, we're talking about over 1,600 sites, and we understand that approximately 800 of those are on the list of the cultural heritage of our country, and the bigger even amount is in the cultural infrastructure. And for sure, right now, when we talk about our challenges, we understand that we can split them into several directions. First of all, the destructions are continuing, and we have the constant shelling of all our territory, no matter if our sites have already gone to the list under protection or in the cultural heritage. You all could have seen Odessa and Lviv very closely, like a few weeks ago, being bombed. The second one is for sure, we understand that the amount of people who have relocated to the other countries is so big that we have to think about those people in so many different ways. On one way, for sure, the countries where the people have relocated, they need to adapt to the local ways of living. On the other hand, it's so important for us that they keep some links with the roots of their country, keep the possibility to talk their language, to learn their language, to have the access to our culture and so on. Even moreover, should we already think of how to get those people back? And for sure, these questions, they are very important for us. And this is not only about the rebuilding the infrastructure, it's about creating the completely new way of life in our country to make it more attractive and to allow and give people possibilities to find better life back at their homes.
Thank you. Michael Chruściel, over to you. You represent Minister Jadwiga Emilewicz, the newly appointed plenipotentiary for Ukraine reconstruction of the Polish government. You recently had an event in Poznań where we were discussing Polish companies interested in investing in the reconstruction of Ukraine. For those who are on the outside, you know, the challenge of reconstruction of Ukraine seems like a daunting task. There's the war still going on. There are parts of the country that are more destroyed, less destroyed. Coming out of that summit and of the latest work that you're doing, maybe give us a quick overview of, you know, what you have achieved, but what challenges remain from your horizon.
Thank you very much, Aaron. Thank you all distinguished organizers and guests for this event. I'm very happy to be here because every time we talk with our Ukrainian partners, our Ukrainian colleagues, and also our foreign colleagues who are interested in the process of recovery and modernization of Ukraine, we always say that Poland can play a role as a recovery hub to deliver all the products, to coordinate the logistics and so on. And now I can actually see how this hub looks like here in Rzeszów, because this is actually, and this will be the center of the reconstruction. So it's great to be here. And of course, as the office of the government plenipotentiary for Polish-Ukrainian development cooperation, Mrs. Jadwiga Emilewicz, we are struggling with different issues, challenges that are faced by Polish companies and also foreign companies who are willing to get involved in the recovery process and who are willing to get involved in the Ukrainian market. Of course, there are many challenges. Some of them are stemming from directly from the war which is going on in Ukraine, and the threat is still very real. Just recently, we could observe the bombing, the shelling of some factories in Lviv, also Polish companies' factories. So we have to bear it in mind. But on the other hand, we are creating a special mechanism to de-risk. So to provide companies with some kind of guarantees, insurance, that if they invest in Ukraine, not only directly, but also they invest in the trade between Poland and Ukraine, they can get a fair insurance, which in normal circumstances, I mean, in the commercial market, it wouldn't be possible. So that's why recently Polish Parliament and also President Duda adopted a law. It was an amendment of the law on the Polish Export Credit Agency, which is providing financial guarantees for banks, for private insurance companies, to attract them to give credits to Polish business, to Ukrainian business, to foreign business, to think about investment and trade with Ukraine. So this is the new development. This is a new tool. We believe that business will take it very seriously and take this advantage, and now consider its plans to make the expansion on the Ukrainian market. So this is very important. We also, in June, reopened the office of the Polish Agency of Investment and Trade. So now also Polish companies can receive help directly in Ukraine, in Kiev. This is also very important, so they have, the point of contact. And this is one of the challenges, so the risk which is concerning the war. There are also other challenges, and of course there is a general problem with the economic and administrative system in Ukraine, also the legal system. Of course, here there are still some issues of non-transparency, and we see the big effort from the side of the Ukrainian authorities, especially the Ministry of Communities, the Ministry of Infrastructure of Ukraine, who is also dealing with the recovery process. So we are also waiting for the reduction of very sometimes difficult and strange requirements, for example, in the case of public tenders and procurement system. So for sure it must be somehow make much more easier, much more convenient for business communities. And we also tried to provide Polish and foreign business that is still experiencing some problems in the normal activity in Ukraine with the diplomatic help. So every such a problem must be identified, must be notified, and then solved with the help of Ukrainian authorities. And for the moment, there are around 600 companies that are still active on the Ukrainian market. So we see that they are doing quite well regarding the circumstances, and they want to expand, they want to invest more. Of course, they are waiting a little bit what will be the situation with the war going on and what will be this financial mechanism and also the response of the global community. So here I mean the funds, the international funds for the recovery. We hope that European Union will also start providing these funds from the instrument for Ukraine next year. So it will be also a very important moment. So here are these two, kinds of challenges, military one and let's say systemic one. We see that the Polish business is still very much interested in the recovery process. We also experienced this in Poznań at the Congress last week. So there were around 1,000 participants, a lot of companies. Here I see the same attention. So this is a good sign, a very positive sign, and I'm also very happy that we can facilitate this process and coordinate the work of the Polish administration in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you. Just very quickly, what's the status of this insurance, the insurance project model? Because I do hear that a lot of Polish companies, for obvious reasons, talked about that as one of the biggest challenge for investment. Are you in the final stage of this, or?
Yes, actually, if I'm not mistaken, this law is coming into force as of today. And KUKE was already prepared with a new products, also in reinsurance of transport. So Polish companies who transport products from the Polish market to the Ukrainian market, now they can be able to get the crucial insurance of the goods being delivered. So I also would like to request all the business representatives here to check the offer of the KUKE, so Polish Credit Export Agency, because it's really a breakthrough. We know that other countries are now trying to do the same, so to provide this insurance scheme, also war insurance. We hope that the fact that Poland is one of the first, because there is also MIGA, so the World Bank agency providing these insurances. But we believe that as Poland is one of the first in this, let's say, race to provide the best conditions for the business, that also Polish and also Ukrainian companies that are here, registered here, since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, around 30,000 new businesses has been created in Poland. So this is a huge also, I would say, force for the recovery of Ukraine. So I believe that all of them will be able to use this new mechanism.
Thank you. Great to hear. Shams Asadi, over to you. I mean, as a representative of a human rights organization, you've probably seen your fair share of atrocities and horrible stories from Ukraine. I think, I mean, as I tried to say in the beginning, this war brings back to some of the worst elements of the 1940s. Back, we thought that we would often say never again, and then it happens again. So I guess my question to you would be like, what keeps you going? Give us some hope as well, please.
Thank you very much, Aaron. Just one thing, I'm not from an NGO, I'm from the administration of City of Vienna. And so I am in a very official mission here from our mayor and from our government of the city. And I'm very thankful for organizing of this conference and this year and in this time over here. Because this year is the year of the human rights. Why? As you mentioned, it is the 75 years after the Declaration of the Human Rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and what's happening, the violation of this declaration in this time. Last year, it was 74 years after the aggression of Russia in Ukraine. And now we have 75 years later, and this aggression is going on, and it is the most violation of the human rights during a war and the armed conflicts. So there is no doubt. And then just one side step, it is also this year, 30 years of Vienna Conference, the UN Vienna Conference, brought up with a lot of outcomes. And one of those outcomes is women's rights are human rights. And we know that in the time of conflicts and wars, the women's rights, they are most violated. So Ukraine is not an exception. And we know that there is a lot of migrants that they started, the women were the first migrants that they had to leave their countries. So again, we are going to have a huge conference in Vienna, and this year with United Nations and the Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights, and we ourselves from Vienna and as a UN location, and of course as a city of human rights that we are, since 10 years, we are a city of human rights. So we will consider all of the human rights that we have to take care of them, I mean, more and more, and it's democracy. And again, this war is a kind of war against democracy too, we consider. But coming back to the, legislation, and we know that there is two very important laws that they are, in the time of war, they are important. One of them, it is the international humanitarian law, and the other one is the human rights law. So until 20 years ago, the universal humanitarian law was considered as a law of war. But it's not only law of war, it is the human rights. And these two laws, they bring up that to do's and not to do's during of the crisis. So as I mentioned, the right of the child, right of women, or just even if people, they are in prison and they were attackers, so they have also some very important, rights. So And of course, we know that the tribunal and international tribunal, we have all of the preparations and for the future, and it is very important to have the legislation behind that. So coming back to Ukraine and the successes that we consider, one of them, I'm very happy that Mr. Marshall, just mentioned in his speech two very important points for me. One was the accountability of the governments, and the second one was transparency. And these two, they are very important for, all governance levels, but for the state levels also. And I listened to you, and it was transparency also a part of that. And it means in our daily life, it is corruption. So Ukraine has started with combating of corruption. We cannot tell that corruption is only the problem of Ukraine, no. It is everywhere, and it is the most violation of human rights. Because if the states, they are busy with corruption, the most vulnerable people in the society, they are not going to come to their rights, and it is right to food, it is right to water, it is right to, daily life and transportation, accessibility, and everything. So Ukraine has set the first steps. We are very happy. Austrian delegation was this week in Ukraine, and they had a meeting with President Zelensky, and it was such a preparation of the first step of being accepted in European Union. And I guess it is very important to know that Ukraine could be a member in European Union in the next years. And then coming from my local level, I have 3 examples that I want to bring it up here. Sorry. One example is that we had this year a very famous conference of sympathetic cities in Krakow. And there were most of the, Polish cities, they were there, and some of the European cities, and we had the honor to be invited, and I was as the representative of the city over there. And we had a lady from Kiev that she is responsible for the people with disabilities, and the construction of the city or just repairing of the city for future for disabled people, because we know that after war we are going to have a lot of disabled people in Ukraine. So preparation of the city for disabled people, it is, for me, it is the real good step for being aware about the human rights. It's a very good example, just construction of the city or buses or just accessibility everywhere was a subject. And of course, this subject is also the UN right of the disabled people, and it is just the implementation of this law, and it is obligatory for all of the governments to fulfill it. Second one was in beginning of May this year, I received a delegation from young Ukraine people. It was the Academy of Leadership in Kiev that they visited me, and it was about 60 young people, and they are being prepared for the future as leadership. And it was very interesting to discuss with them about the future and the future of human rights, and just being aware or consciousness raising on human rights. It was very interesting to see the young people that they discuss on this subject. And the third example is, as Mrs. Minister for Culture she mentioned, it is the preparation of people with their own language or just speaking of their own language. And in Vienna, we have started with just Ukraine school. It used to be a Ukraine school in Vienna, but I have to mention about 100,000 Ukrainian people in Austria, and most of them in Vienna. So 100,000, if you say 30% of them, they are young people, they have to prepare even for not forgetting their mother tongue. And we have started in our schools, and we were very happy that last year, with the starting of coming up the Ukrainian newcomers to our city, we received from the Ministry of Culture the online Ukrainian courses in all levels of the school. So it's a good preparation for Ukraine, and it's a good cooperation with our city, with Ukrainian cultural minister and over their educational ministry for preparation of young people to come back and just be capable to speak their language.
Thank you. I should have said not human rights organization, but as somebody who works with human rights. Sorry about that. I guess just, to put a quick question, just, to put you a little bit on the spot there, but, let's be frank, the human rights violations in Ukraine, it's Russia. It is Russia that's committing the human rights violations. And so I guess, I'm a simple guy, I'm not a lawyer. How do we bring these people to justice? How do we hold them accountable?
I mean, there is a lot of recording of all of the violations. And, I mean, The Hague is the tribunal, and it's going to be prepared. So it's going to take a little bit time, we know that. But look at to the war that we had in 90s, because Ukrainian war is not the first war after the 1945 in Europe. We had 5 years of war in former Yugoslavia, and what happened? They came also to tribunal. So there is a lot of forces behind all of this war to record everything that's happening. And so I'm sure that upon the time, we are going to, I do hope that all of us, we are going to just look and see what's going on in The Hague, in the International Tribunal Against Human Rights. And of course, European Union, we do have also the EGM, also the European Human Rights Law, Court also.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Now we have to make sure that Ukraine wins the war first. Over to you, Michael Capponi. When I looked up your organization, it seems that you are everywhere. I was in Rzeszów the first time in April 2022. It struck me that there was a lot of goodwill, a lot of organizations being there, but slightly everybody was maybe a little bit chaotic. Everybody was doing their own thing. Now, of course, not everything can be planned from above, nor should it be. But I would like to hear your perspective on sort of where we've come since then, if you could do that.
Thank you. And everybody plays their role, their part. Everybody has to be in their lanes. And so we arrived here on day 2. We went straight to Medica. We had the first tent set up, and we watched the influx of Ukrainian escapees, let's call them, fearing for their life coming over. So there was a lot of action at the border, as everybody knows in the beginning. Eventually, a lot of groups set up different tents, and we felt like it wasn't really needed for us to be there anymore. So we went on and set up our first main warehouse here in Rzeszów, actually. And that warehouse was a warehouse for anyone who was willing at the time to basically go inside Ukraine. This was still, we're talking about late February, early March, very dangerous at that time. And we had aid coming in from all different countries in Europe and also from the United States. We imported about 400 containers from the United States, and we realized that we started spending a lot of money on shipping, and it was very expensive to do that. And looking in foresight, that would not be sustainable for a 3, 5, 10-year game to be able to do that, right? So we had to find different solutions that would also benefit Ukraine much better. So when Russia decided to focus more on the east, we went inside. We set up major headquarters in Kyiv, and eventually we met with local farmers all throughout Ukraine. We put about 100 farms in business. We put their food factories in partnership with Howard G. Buffett, and they started producing the food that we deliver to the front lines every month, which created jobs and a kind of its own ecosystem in a way, right? So we went from importing 100% to importing now 10%, right? Which is better for Ukraine. So those are large-scale ideas, right? Solving complex problems is what we do. And we're really focused on reversing refugee crises, not really adding to the problem. So in the beginning, when everybody was here, we were basically spending a lot of money again, supporting the expo here in Warsaw that was housing, thousands of people. And we were sitting on cots with people every day speaking to them. And they wanted to go back in Ukraine. This was their will. But they needed a series of things. They needed to make sure that their children were going to go back to school. They needed to make sure that, there was certain measures that were taken. Kyiv had a population of 3.5 million before the war. At the height of mid-March, they were down to 600,000-700,000 people living there. And they're back up to 3.3 million, I believe, currently, right? Despite all of this. So people went back in the country. So that's a really important thing, because Poland would have a much bigger problem than it does today if all those refugees, right, were still in country. Same with America, same with all the different countries all throughout the world. So how do you keep it from getting a bigger problem, right? And those are the kind of methods. Another thing that we do that I think is a very important program, we put 2 factories in business in Ukraine. They produce about 6,000 or so windows per month. Those windows only cost us about $150 a window, and we actually replace about 5,000-6,000 windows every single month. So every time Putin plays his little video game and, explodes a building, building A that the rocket hit is not repairable. But all the surrounding buildings in the neighborhood lose all their windows. If you don't replace those windows immediately, in the winter, those people will freeze, or they'll become IDPs, which will put more burden and more costs on the Ukrainian government. So that's called nipping it, right, before it happens. And these are the kind of initiatives that, our foundation, Global Empowerment Mission, focuses on.
Very interesting. Just about those windows, because that's so you manufacture them in Ukraine. You're saying, okay? Are they being what part of the country are they in? Are they being safe, or do you experience problems with that too? Because sometimes I get the feeling that when Russia does its campaign of destruction, it's almost like making things as complicated and difficult as possible for those who want to help Ukraine, right? Just in order to discourage them from doing it. This is just me speculating, but sometimes you get that impression from the Russian
they're made in safe areas. Certainly not going to disclose where we make them, but so far, we've repaired about 350 structures. We also have an arm that does repair work, and we don't look at repair work as let's create a beautiful pet project with a ribbon cutting that you make all perfect. We look at it as dollar versus impact. What is it going to cost to get this school repaired so children can go back in and there's a bunker and XYZ, right? And those are the kind of things we look at. And it's just, how much do you spend versus how many people is it going to help? And sometimes that math makes a lot more sense. I'll give you an example. You can repair, with $120,000, you can repair a building that's going to put 120 people back into their apartment buildings, right? In our view, the chances are that that exact same building gets hit again very low, right? But those people, that's their home. That's what they choose, and that's what they want to go. So you can invest $1,000 per person, put them back into their apartment building, prevent a refugee crisis, or you can ignore it, and then the problem just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. What Putin tries to do every time he hits that is to try to get everybody to leave. If everybody would have left already, the war would have been lost a long time ago. But they will not leave, and that's the perseverance of the Ukrainians, which is so important. And I think that's what, like, all we hear is, it doesn't matter. If we don't have electricity this winter, it doesn't matter. We will sit at the table, we will light a candle, we are not leaving, right? That's an important thing.
Yes, an inspiration to all of us, for sure. John, last to you. Maybe a difficult question, but I would like you to tell us a little bit about, how the long-term history, right? How the progress that's been made. Because if I understood correctly, you were there when Ukraine declared its independence. So maybe a hard question, but you were sort of into Ukraine before it was cool. So maybe tell us a little bit how you see the journey that Ukraine has made.
Well, thank you so much, Aaron. It's great to be here to represent the organization that I lead, Rotary International. Our 1.4 million Rotarians around the world, we've contributed about $75 million in assistance to Ukraine since the war started. Really an unprecedented response by our Rotarians. So again, it's really an honor to be here. And yeah, perhaps I can take us back to August of 1991 when Ukraine declared independence and provide a little bit of historical perspective and really demonstrate how far Ukraine has come, particularly for some of the audience who may be on the younger spectrum of the age spectrum, who may not even been born or around when Ukraine declared independence. Back in the late 80s, I was a young lawyer working in Moscow for a large international law firm, Baker & McKenzie. We were the first Western law firm to be accredited in the former Soviet Union. And then in the spring of 1991, I received a grant from George Soros to move to Kyiv and work as a legal advisor in the Ukrainian parliament. And for me, it was quite an extraordinary experience. A 30-year-old lawyer with my ID card with a hammer and sickle on it, Ivan Lyubomirovich Hewko. And for me, the sort of son of bourgeois nationalists, to be working in the Verkhovna Rada, to be able to sort of be on the inside was something that I certainly never imagined as I was growing up. And so, as you know, the coup took place in Moscow on August 19th, 1991. I spent the 3 days of the coup in the Verkhovna Rada building outside of Leonid Kravchuk's office. A lot of interesting insight in terms of what was happening during those 3 days of the coup. And then on August 21st or 22nd, Yeltsin got up on the tank in front of the White House in Moscow, and the coup was in effect over. And so the Verkhovna Rada was out of session at that time, and they called an emergency session for the 24th of August to figure out how Ukraine was going to react to the events that had transpired in Moscow. And the night of the 23rd, the night before the session, the Narodna Rada, which was the Democratic faction in the Verkhovna Rada, and they had about 25% of the deputies at the time, met on the third floor of the building. And a huge debate broke out, one faction saying, let's go for independence tomorrow, and another faction saying, no, we do not want to be run by a communist-led Ukraine. Let's first decommunize Ukraine and then go for independence later. And for me, as a young lawyer sitting there listening to this, it was sort of like what it must have been like on July 3rd, 1776 in the United States, and seeing Jefferson and Monroe and Franklin debate what they're going to do the next day in terms of declaring the independence of the United States. At the end of the day, they decided to go for independence, and they began feverishly drafting a whole series of decrees of Postanova that they wanted to have approved the next day during the session. As they're drafting away, one of the deputies, Ivan Zayats, comes up to me and says, Ivan, we have a problem, and this can only happen in Ukraine. I said, what's the problem? And he said, we have no way of photocopying these decrees so that we can bring them to the Verkhovna Rada the next day and allow the deputies to vote on it. And you have to realize at that time, there were very few copy machines in Ukraine. And I said, well, I knew there was one in the Secretariat. And I said, there's a gentleman named Khomenko running. I go, why don't you go to Khomenko and get him to copy it for you? And he said, no, he's a communist. The secretariat is run by the communists. They'll never copy these decrees. And I happen to have a small little copy machine. I remember the name, a Canon PC7. And my wife had just brought a box of A4 paper from Moscow. And I said, why don't you give me all these decrees? And I took them, and I spent the evening with a student from the university. We spent all night making 450 copies of each of these decrees. We didn't have enough paper, so we had to put 4 on each one. The next morning, I showed up, 7 in the morning, with a box full of all this stuff. I handed it to Volodymyr Filenko, who was the deputy head of the Narodna Rada. The communists freaked out. Where did all this come from? And 6 hours later, Ukraine declared independence. I suspect it would have declared independence without my little photocopy machine. But I think the incident does demonstrate, one, the serendipitous nature of history, but also how far Ukraine has come on all levels. And I think it's, for me, having been there in '91, the journey that Ukraine has taken has been difficult, it's been long, but Ukraine has now, with this horrific war, clearly demonstrated it has arrived as a nation. If you see the technology, the high level of technology that's being used by the Ukrainian army at the front right now, and you go back to August 24th, 1991, where they couldn't find a copy machine to make copies of the documents that were going to lead to Ukrainian independence, you really see how far Ukraine has come. And we see that with civil society. This war has really elevated and turned Ukrainian civil society into a true force, not only a force for good, but also a force to incentivize and push for much needed change. And if you will look back at 1991, it was absolutely non-existent. And so Ukraine has come an extraordinarily long way. And for me, it's been certainly a privilege to be part of that journey, and for my organization, Rotary, to really be contributing at a time when Ukraine is really facing, as we all know, an existential threat.
Wow, thank you. What a story. The little copying machine. That's amazing. That's amazing. I guess, I mean, maybe a difficult question, but you know, these days, obviously, what Russia's trying to do is to destroy Ukrainian civil society, and there are things we need to do to stop that. But you know, from your perspective, then, looking at this history, like what is something that you would say, like, well, you know, obviously it's not a copying machine, but you know, what is it that that you see as the biggest challenge from your horizon right now, in terms of like helping Ukrainian civil society and because we all have our different roles, right? Some deliver weapons, and from your horizon, like where do you stand as the biggest challenge, I guess?
I think, first of all, we need to recognize the extraordinary role that civil society has played, certainly over the last 20-some years of Ukrainian history. Whereas Russia's civil society was basically dead, in Ukraine, it was fairly strong and thriving. And so you look at the role that civil society played in the Orange Revolution, in Maidan in 2014, and now at this time during the war. And it's not just providing much-needed humanitarian aid. It's not just filling the gap where government can't do things. It's really acting, and I think probably the most important role is acting as a watchdog. We talked about corruption, and you talked about the need to work on corruption. And yes, Ukraine's come a long way, but it's still, I guess, 116 in the list of 180 countries in terms of corruption. So Ukraine is still in the bottom half. It needs to be in the top 50, in my view. And so how's that going to happen? Well, I think civil society here needs to continue to play a huge role, pushing on the government, holding the government's feet to the fire, making sure the assistance is being used properly. And we saw that with the asset declaration issue. They didn't want to make them public. Civil society, people jumped on board, signed a petition, pressured the government, and now the asset declarations are going to be made public. And so Ukraine is very fortunate, when you compare it to other post-Soviet countries, to have had post-Soviet Union republics, to have a thriving civil society. It obviously has challenges. And that's one of the things, there's going to be a panel this afternoon that I'm going to be moderating that I would urge you to come to, where we're going to talk about the need to adopt a code of ethics, a code of conduct for nonprofits, to ensure that we in the nonprofit sector are also not corrupt, that we're properly using this funding, because the last thing we need is to have issues of corruption arise. That'll cut off donor support, both bilateral, country to country, but also from private donors. So civil society has played an extraordinary role, and I think now will even play a more important role as Ukraine moves toward victory and then moves toward integration into the European Union.
Well said. Thank you. Minister, yes, give them a good applause, round of applause. Since we're bumping up towards the end here, Minister Bondar, since we have you, you've heard what our distinguished panel has said. Does it give you hope in terms of where from where you're sitting? You've heard from Polish business. We've heard from on civil society issues, human rights, helping refugees. I would like to hear your thoughts on what you've heard so far, and if it gives you hope, or if you think that we're sort of stuck somewhere.
Can you hear me? I guess that the most important is that the hope never left us. And thank you very much for putting those statements about the civil society, and for sure, speaking about the hope and no desire to leave, but the desire to stay and to develop. It has started with the first day of war and with our president saying that he doesn't need the lift, but he needs the weapons to protect because he wants to stay. And I think that this is where it all started, with the new wave of development, the new stage of growth of our civil society. I'm very, very thankful that now the stress is moving, not for sure to mention the importance of the reconstruction and recovery, it's moving to the development. Development is very, very important, and even and especially during the war. Each day without development is the step back. So it's very, very important, and not only in the economic spheres, for sure, I'm talking about and representing the cultural sphere in here. And even though the culture is not on the top list and it always stands a little bit of the behind of the education, the medical, and the social, and so on and so on, we have to remember that for sure culture definitely stands there on those grounds of the basics of the people's resilience. So I would really like to thank all the countries, those who are putting effort to support us, and especially those who have now realized that economic growth in each and every direction is of the vital importance for our keeping our hope alive.
Thank you, Deputy Minister. I personally prefer interaction and questions rather than lectures when we do panels. I do wonder if we have time and opportunity for questions. I should have asked the organizers this before. Maybe they'll get mad at me, but hopefully we should be able to have time for some questions. We have someone here in the front. When you ask a question, please identify yourself. Say your name and your title and affiliation.
Thank you very much. Titus Czartoryski is controller of the local parliament in Lower Silesia. Recently, the fashionable pastime is to ask our Ukrainian friends about corruption, but we have to remember that corruption is on the highest levels of the European Union, so it should be no obstacle to joining the Union. And as a matter of the fact, it was interesting very much to hear about the plans to cooperate with our Ukrainian friends for the next weeks and months and so on. But shouldn't it to be considered that we should plan the relation with our Ukrainian neighbors for the next 100 years? Thank you.
Thank you. We get the microphone. Okay. So, who would like to tackle that question? Was that a question for a specific member of the panel, or?
Yes.
I'm
going to answer.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, you're right. Even in Parliament of Europe, we had cases of corruption. But speaking about that, and of course, to clear up or the consequences that people that they are corrupted, they have to go, it is very important. I'm telling you small example of what we had in Austria about the vice minister, prime minister, that he had a video that he wanted in such a corruption that people, they went to the street, and I mean, the next day he had to go, or he had to just drop his office. So it is very important to be clear and transfer, and just to people that their names they are in this corruption list, they are at rest, and they have to leave their positions. You are completely right, but we have to take the corruption as a human rights violence, and we have to just combat with that, wherever that it is, if it is in European Union.
Thank you. We have a question from a gentleman over there, if you could get a microphone there.
Yeah, thank you. Like Mr. Hewko, I'm a lawyer. I'm retired. My question goes to about corruption, but a carefully thought out discussion of it, because I go back to 1964, so I'm an older man. Like, I don't know how old you are, but I was in the Marine Corps in '64 in the United States.
Older than me. Yeah.
Anyway, back several months ago in America, I was sitting with some senior citizens, and they were kind of like trashing the idea of helping Ukraine. And I got up and I left. I never talked to them again. I tried to get to Ukraine last year. No one was responding. And then I understood, because now I live in Ukraine, Lviv, for the last 6 months, and I've gotten a 1-year residency permit now. I started an organization called Slava Ukraini, based upon Malcolm Nance, who served he's a fantastic public speaker who was on MSNBC. And I remember when he served and he finished serving, he said, Slava Ukraini. I said, that'll be the name of the foundation. So I tried to join the Ukrainian military to get over here. They said, you're an old man. And I said, I really am. So anyway, I formed this foundation, Slava Ukraini. And in the months that I've been in Ukraine, I've worked with many good Ukrainian people. And during the war, what fascinates me is how volunteerism and patriotism stand together. People who volunteer really cannot have a private agenda. Egos are out of the way. It's for the benefit of Ukraine. So I'm working with I've assembled 10 Ukrainian writers, and we've begun a book called In the Land of Blood and Sunflowers. And it's a beautiful book, and basically I used to teach writing, and I've written a couple of political books myself to impeach Bush when he invaded Iraq for the same thing that the Russians did to the United States, to Ukraine. And in our process of writing, I've strayed away from any criticism of corruption in Ukraine, because people I figured donations won't come. So one of the things that is most bothersome, and this is mainly for the Minister of Culture of Ukraine, is that many of my friends I've made in Ukraine, we observed that there was a man who had both legs amputated, an Army veteran, and he went to what is called I forget, it's a Social Security, I forget what it's called, Old Man Mind. But anyway, and he was told, we don't know that you're disabled. For God's sakes, the man has no friggin' legs. What do you mean you don't know he's disabled? It took him months to get And it took the people finally getting pissed off on the internet and saying, hey, you know, and what we learned was that the people running that system are very corrupt. Give me 5,000 and I'll give you your certificate of disability. We didn't report on this because we don't want people in America to know about this. But at what point and how long will it take? Because I'm concerned about the veterans of this war. I know several of them.
Can I?
Thank you. I'm going to have to move it over to the Minister so she has the chance to respond. Minister Bondar, was a clear and specific question. How have you recognized this problem and what is being done about it?
Well, actually, I would agree to the previous statement that corruption exists all over the world, for sure, to different extents and in different levels, in different ways, but it is everywhere. The particular case which we've heard right now, for sure, it's devastating and has to be taken up, and I am sure that it can and should be solved faster and at the place, and such events should not be happening. But we are also learning. And this is not something what we can read in the book of rules. This is something what we are living through as the ongoing training and living the life at the same time. So and we should keep in mind that all people who are staying in Ukraine right now, they are affected. They are psychologically changed. So in particular, when we have some concrete cases in concrete places, those could be of the personal attitude, in particular taking time and place. So for sure, on the general level, this is something what not to be happening in general. But to cover up my speeches, I clearly believe that those countries which stand behind in no matter in how many different fields, if they have the wish, and I strongly believe that Ukraine has a strong wish to develop and grow, there exists a possibility to jump over in front, just ahead, using all the experiences which there were during all the previous years used by all the other countries, and then become the leader in certain fields. So I do believe that Ukraine is going to take that leadership place.
Thank you, Deputy Minister. Michael Capponi, a few seconds then, because we're over our time. But I know you want to say something.
So coming from a third party, right? I'm neutral, I'm not Ukrainian. We have operated in 54 different countries, and I can give my own 2 cents here. I've never seen actually more regulation by a government than in Ukraine on a nonprofit. So the parliament is doing their best to put those things into place. For example, in the United States or in Turkey, we pick it up at the airport, we deliver where we want. The government never needs to know what we did with it. In Ukraine, we deliver 200 trucks per month to the front line. Every one of those trucks has, say, 1,400 boxes. There needs to be a signature by a mayor that basically signs for it, and then it goes and gets audited once a month, and we send it to the government so they know where our aid is going. We work with every single mayor in a 600-mile front line. I have never heard one of them come to me and say or steal the aid or try to get kickbacks or anything. So there's bad seeds in all of humanity. It exists on our entire planet, right? But the Ukrainian government is doing what they can to put the proper measures in. And that's a fact from my perspective as a humanitarian.
Thank you so much. Let's end on that note of hope. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you to the panel, to Deputy Minister Bondar, to Mr. Chruściel, Shams Asadi, Malcolm Capponi, John Hewko. I hope we have an interesting 2 days filled with good, productive discussions. Thank you so much for your attention.